Our first module is project management and organizational strategic business value. One of my certifications is a certified information security manager of management programs from the top down, an ISSMP, Information System Management Security Professional. Now, I look at it like a CISSP, technical from the bottom up, in the trenches doing your technical security work, but the SMP, System Management Professional, takes it from the organizational view down. It encompasses not only IT, if that's what you're in, but also you have to consider the business operations, your strategic organizational values, and why you're doing a project. As we'll see, you should never undertake a project if it does not contribute to the organizational strategies, their business values, and their goals. So we're going to look at that in this chapter and refer to this many times throughout our course. So this is chapter 1 of the PMBOK. So read that, and here we go with this. Notice on the front of your PMBOK guide, it says guide. It is not the actual standard in the first part of the PMBOK. The actual standard is in the back, and we'll talk about that later. But the guide goes through 47 of the standard project management processes, and it elaborates on them rather than reading the raw, cold standard. So that's what it does in the first part of the manual. Now you, as the project management practitioner, need to have your personal project management experience in order to leverage and understand and really apply these 47 processes that we'll get into. The PMP exam requires you to have a certain number of hours and years of experience in order to sit for the PMP exam. So the two together, understanding this PMBOK, will bring you a long way toward your PMP exam success, plus your experience, because many of the PMP exam questions integrate your experience with the methodology, so they understand you know how to apply this. There are other PMP frameworks, project management frameworks out there. The PMBOK is one. Waterfall projects in general are out there, but Prince2 is a big European project management framework, and there are others, but PMBOK and the PMP is by far the most widely recognized project management certification standard in the world. So this is, if you're going to learn one, this is by far the best in my opinion. So we're talking about standards, so let's actually define a standard. In your PMBOK, under Annex A1 is the actual standard. It looks much like the front part throughout the guide without a lot of the elaboration and explanation. But ISO here is the International Standards Organization, and they define a standard. Let's just read this a second. A standard is a document approved by a recognized body, in this case ISO, that provides for common and repeated use, as a standard, common and repeated use, rules, guidelines, and characteristics for what? For products, processes, and services, which happen to be deliverables, by the way, in which compliance is not mandatory. Your organization may have a standard, and if you use it, that is it, but it is not required unless your organization requires it. So just because the project management body of knowledge is a standard does not mean that you're required to use it. Of course, that's your organizational decision, or yours personally if you have that option. By the way, the actual standard is called, a rather cumbersome title, Standard for Project Management of a Project. Okay, so it's right there. Now ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, has accredited Project Management Institute as a standards developer back in 1998. This is an incredible, prestigious title that PMI has been conferred upon, because not everyone can write standards for ANSI. So this is a big deal for them. And here's the ANSI PMI actual standard number, 8001-2012 for the PMBOK 5, 5th revision or edition. In there are 10 knowledge areas. There were 9 prior, now there's 10, which includes stakeholder management now as its own knowledge area. We'll get into great detail on that later. There are 5 process groups, which we'll talk about, of course, in detail, and again, the 47 processes. So you have inputs, processes, outputs, and that's all in the standard. Organizational process assets, I'll mention that right here. We're going to go into a lot of detail, and you'll get tired of this by the end of this course, but it is essential that you understand what this is. Organizational process assets are what is available to you as the project management practitioner from your organization. It could be policies, templates, rules, guidelines, standards. It could be anything that you need to run your project that has already been done by your organization. And most importantly, even, it includes all of your historical information of past projects, assuming that those project managers have been diligent enough to actually file them away for future project management use. And those are organizational process assets. The flip side we'll see is called an enterprise environmental factor, and we'll talk about that also pretty soon. So Chapter 1 or Module 1, we're going to talk about what is a project. Now you may say, well, I already know what a project is, but we need to have this foundation in the first 3 modules before we actually get into the PMBOK processes themselves. And this is essential, it's key, because we need to look at this from the organization on down so that we know why we're doing a project and how it benefits the organization. So basically, a project is, and for the PMP exam, you need to know these definitions. And I'll say this right here up front, and we'll say it again later. No matter what you know, no matter how successful you are in your projects, if you have nothing to do with PMBOK, remember when you take your PMP, you have to answer the questions in the PMBOK way. Even if you feel it's not right, it's wrong, it's not how you do it, answer them in the PMBOK way or you're going to not pass the test properly. So here's their definition of a project. And this is pretty fundamental universally anyway. It's a temporary endeavor. Temporary. It has a beginning, a start, and it has a definite finish at some point in time. And it's finished, though, when all project objectives are met. Project objectives are not just, I've delivered the product, Mr. Customer, thank you very much, pay me. It's much more than that. It's, have you actually completed your project on time, within your budget? Did you actually deliver the first time around what the client wanted? And not only did you do that, objectives could be, is your customer satisfied? And that's a tough one, but that's part of the project objective. So when all those are met, your project, it could be over. Finally, here, what is a project? Again, down here, it creates a unique product or a service or a result transition. Now, we can understand what a unique product could be. Here's this blue box with 3 buttons. Deliver it, that's your product. A service, you could have a service. You could, a new help desk service. You could design a project to implement help desk capability in your organization. That's a service. Now, what is a result transition? This throws a lot of new project managers or even experienced project managers. Just what does that mean? Maybe you have some dirty ductwork that's pumping out soot because they're old and your employees are complaining. Well, you institute a project approved by your organization to clean the ductwork and make it healthy for your individuals. That is a result transition from an unhealthy to a healthy environment. And by the way, you would do that probably normally anyway, but I'm sure your organization probably has some objective, some strategy to provide a healthy working environment and safe environment for your employees. So that project would contribute and provide business value when you do that. So that is a result transition. And projects generally, like I mentioned, follow organizational procedures if in fact your organization has them. Okay, let's talk about what project management is now that we understand what a project is. Project management is, and this is a direct quote from your PMBOK, it's the application of your knowledge, of your skills, and of your use of tools and techniques to project activities to meet the project requirements. That is the official definition of project management. Now, this application of this knowledge, process, skills, tools, and techniques, if you do them right, they can have a significant effect on your project success, which is what PMBOK's all about. There are 10 project management knowledge areas in PMBOK. Let's look at them. Integration, and I'll explain why that's bolded shortly, or I'm sorry, why it's italicized. We have, here are the main knowledge areas. Scope. Scope is what it is you're going to build, your deliverables, your product, your results, or your service. The time it takes to do that, the cost to do that, the quality of those products that you deliver, the human resources that are needed to fill out your project team, and communications, of course, is key, how you communicate your project. In fact, I'll say this again later, but the general consensus in the project management community is that 80 to 90% of a good project manager's job is communicating to their constituents, to the team, to their stakeholders. Without communication, you're down the road to failure, so you need to communicate. Risk management in a project is incredibly significant. Without this, you don't know how to respond if there's a problem. So you need to consider risk, and we have an entire knowledge area, obviously, about this, and we'll get to that sooner than later. Procurement. If you need to buy goods and services from the outside, procurement is a huge knowledge area that you need to understand and interface with. And in fact, in smaller projects, depending on your organization, you as the project manager may actually be doing some of the procurement, although that is rather rare. Most organizations have their own dedicated purchasing staff, or they have a purchasing procurement representative on the project team. So procurement's a big one. And stakeholder, without stakeholder, understanding your stakeholders completely and staying engaged with them entirely through the project, you're setting yourself up for big time failure. So you need to know your stakeholders, and that's one of the first knowledge areas that we're going to talk about. Here's the same list, except I bolded 4 of these items, and I did that because experience, even on the project management forums, on LinkedIn and on other sites, It is recognized that without integration, without good stakeholder management and engagement, without understanding your project risks, and without applying quality methods to not only your deliverables but your actual project processes, you know, you're going to have a difficult time achieving real project success. In fact, these 4 items are the most misunderstood or not even considered in many project plans. So these are incredibly important, and we'll talk about these quite a bit. And integration is not a particular thing. It is all of the other knowledge areas here combined, interacting, being iterative, and just integrating. And if you don't integrate properly, you're going to be doing things that are not contributing to the success of your project. So integration is actually the first knowledge area we'll talk about. As a matter of fact, if you look at this list and you look at your PMBOK chapters, these are not in the sequential order of your PMBOK, and there's a reason for that. Because we're going to talk about integration. That's what holds everything together, makes everything work in a coordinated manner. Then we talk about stakeholders. It's so important. You need to do stakeholders first. And then you consider your human resources, where you try to establish your team. Okay, you establish your communication methods, and then you go out with your stakeholders and you develop your scope. What exactly is it that you're going to produce, deliver by your project? Now, once you get your scope, then we're going to talk about risk, because once you do that, with your communications, even your human resources and stakeholders, you have a lot of inherent risks that we'll talk about, and you need to address those now before you get too deep into the project. And then we'll talk about quality. You know, once you've got your risks under control at that point, and you know exactly at that point, now why do I keep saying at that point? We'll find out, but at that point, you know what you're going to be delivering, and you want to apply quality to them before you actually give that to the client as a final product. And those 4, integration, stakeholder, risk, and quality, again, are important. So we're going to talk about them in an advanced order than is what it would be actually in the PMBOK chapters. And then, finally, we talk about time. Time is where most project managers, when they get a new project, they sit on their desk, they call up Microsoft Project, and they start cracking out a project schedule. No, you can't do that. You've got to do these other things first. And then you put your costing to it, and then we consider procurement. Now, in the real world in a project, all these things technically could be going on at once. Okay, generally they could be, but we have this one-way interface here, so we're going to take these in this order. But always consider, and you'll see this reminded throughout the series, that these things are interactive and iterative, and they relate in ways we can't even depict in a drawing. But we're going to take them one by one. So here's the 5 project management process groups. They are initiating, planning, it's in bold, it's a big one, directing and executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. In initiating, that's generally where we first initiate the project. It's authorized. They select a project out of a number of candidates, and here's your new project. They may earmark and allocate some funding for it. But at that point, it is still not an official project. You need to create your project charter. And once that's signed by your sponsor, then you have a viable project. That's initiating. Planning, a big process group. If you don't plan right, nothing else is going to work right on your project. Just trust me on that. So once you plan all of those knowledge areas, how you're going to manage all of those knowledge areas, then you actually apply that, which would by then include your scope and your time and your cost and your schedule, so you know what you're going to be doing. You go into the directing and executing process group. That is where you actually produce the deliverables that are part of your scope. That's the production end of things. Now, throughout all this, you're monitoring and controlling, even from day one. Again, these process groups overlap and integrate. So from day one, when you start to create your project charter under initiating, you're going to be monitoring and controlling to make sure that the actions you take and your project team take are in compliance with the prescribed processes and procedures of the planning group and the directing group and the closing group. Now, closing is very often overlooked by project managers. When the project's done, remember, here, Mr. Client, here's your deliverable, nice, file closed, you're done. No, there's quite a bit to do in closing. So we'll talk about that toward the end. So these are your 5 process groups. Keep these in mind. You should know these by heart pretty soon. Now, if you look in your PMBOK at table 3-1, you'll see this chart over here. This is a knowledge area process group activities, or your ETOs, your activities. It's a matrix, and all 47 processes are never duplicated anywhere. So if you have a look here, you can see the 10 knowledge areas go down the left side of the column. Your 5 process groups go across the top, and then in the body of the matrix are all of the 47 process groups. Now notice, get my little mouse out here, notice up here, here's planning process group. Look how many there are. There are 26 activities which are processes. These are the 47 processes in planning. You can see how very important it is to plan before you execute, which is what this is basically saying. And look at plan time management. Look how many processes are in there. So planning your timing is very important. There are a lot of processes. They're detailed so that you don't miss things. And when we get to these and review these, you'll see the elegance of why we should be doing these things. So you're going to refer to this table many times throughout this course and throughout your professional career if you adopt the PMBOK methodology. So let's go a little further on this. Before I mentioned, here's your scope at this point in time. Here's this at this point in time. Well, what that means is at that point in time, you're not done. You're going to be improving and gathering more detail and fixing things, making corrective actions, making preventative actions. You're going to be refining your documents, and that's all called progressive elaboration, which is a key term in the PMBOK lexicon. So it doesn't mean you do something and you're done. It's not Rev 1 locked. No, it's Rev 1 through Rev whatever it is throughout the project as you improve it and go back and do that. And there are controls to control changes, which is what project integration management is all about. Integration management is about change, and we'll see that. So key project management activities. The key activities are you need to identify your requirements, which is your scope. Sounds easy, give me one of these. Well, how big, what color, what are your options, what are the features, what's the, just all this stuff is incredibly detailed, and you get this from who? You don't know what to produce. You have to ask the stakeholders. You have many stakeholders, more than you can probably even believe at this point, and we'll find out why there are many stakeholders. But you will have some key stakeholders, and those are the main people you want to go to get their needs, and not just once, over and over and over again, progressive elaboration, so that when you do build something, you build it the way they want it. Okay, very important. Again, extensive communications. If you don't communicate with your team and you don't communicate with the stakeholders, you're in a world of hurt. So we need to be able to communicate consistently, okay, and only provide the communications that the receiver wants, what they expect in the format and the manner and in the timing they want it. So that's part of our communication plan that we'll find out. Balance competing restraints. You always have competing restraints in a project. Your scope changes, right? You can't change the scope. You can recommend a scope change, but scope could change if it's approved by your stakeholders. The schedule, of course, may change based on many factors. When you don't want the schedule to change because you're managing a project according to what we'll find out is your schedule baseline. But the baseline, if problems become egregious enough, you may have to re-baseline and reschedule your project. So that's competing restraint. Cost is a competing restraint too. Do you buy this? Do you buy that? It's the same thing. What's your better deal? This is cheaper, but this warranty is really bad. Really good warranty here, but it costs more. Is that worth it to you? What's your organizations and your project's risk appetite for that? We'll talk about that under risk. So that's a competing restraint. By the way, these first three, scope, schedule, and cost, there's a word for that in the project management community. It's not in the PMBOK lexicon, okay, which, by the way, is the glossary in the back of the PMBOK. That's your lexicon. And you'll need to know this for your PMP exam because, again, the PMP exam is not quizzing you on what you know about the words in the PMBOK guide. They're quizzing you on how do you apply the best practices in the guide to your real project management personal experience. So because of that experience, you should know that scope, schedule, and cost are called the triple constraint. And by the way, then, a lot of practitioners also consider quality, risks, and resources as part of the triple constraint world, but officially it's scope, schedule, and cost. We'll talk about that. So let's look at our next slide soon. So now we're going to talk again from the organizational point of view down. This is important for project managers to understand, why you're doing a project. And there are a lot of ways, depending on the size of your organization, how they manage projects within their organization. Here, this is called Organizational Project Management, OPM. In your PMP exam, they may or may not use these abbreviations, but if you see OPM, it's Organizational Project Management. And this consists of your projects, programs, of which multiple projects contribute, and you have many programs perhaps, and then portfolios, which aggregates many programs depending on the focus, the strategy, the goal of your organization. My earlier example could be to provide a healthy environment for your employees. They may have a portfolio of projects or programs to actually help provide that benefit among other portfolios for many different diverse reasons for your company. So let's look at what this looks like. Projects, again, they have your specific scope. It's your project, one project, specific scope. And it may have program and portfolio objectives. It should. And as we'll see, a project could be part of our portfolio directly without a program in between. And we'll see that in a diagram shortly. Programs, they manage many different projects, two or more, or there may be one at the beginning, but generally it's more than one project in a program. And the advantage of a program is all these projects have a common focus toward the program that contributes to the portfolio. And the program manager may be able to, and he should, provide leverage and benefits out of the various interdependencies of these projects. They're sharing resources, making sure that if you're done with this project, he moves over to this project so that that program doesn't lose continuity and that kind of thing. And harmonizes, the collective project capabilities in that manner. And then the portfolios are all of your programs and projects aggregated up to that support your organizational strategies. And at the portfolio, that is where your senior management would prioritize all of your portfolios and your programs, and then of course the projects within that. So project, program, portfolio. Now here's a diagram from the PMBOK, and it looks fairly confusing perhaps, and it's got portfolios, sub-portfolios, programs, sub-programs, and a lot of fine print. Well, let's just look at those. If you can boil this down in a number of ways, but you need to understand these concepts here. Start with the project down there in the red. There's your projects, and over on the left is your a little legend. This is project management. This is you and your project, and your compatriots, project managers in their projects. And you can see from the little diagram there, it could be multiple projects. Okay, and they would fold into blue, the programs, and in blue is program management. And that program would be a component of the portfolio, which is your enterprise, your organizational governance. So here we have a simple one, or multiple projects into a program that may have many programs, and then up to your portfolio. Also, like I mentioned earlier, you could have a project that is directly contributing to a portfolio. That's not uncommon, especially if it's a high visibility enough project that needs to be managed in that manner. You can also have projects in your programs that go into sub-portfolios because your main portfolio may be so vast that you need to break it up into various focuses. So that's possible too, sub-portfolios. Another view could be projects into sub-programs, same kind of thing, where a program is broken down into individual focuses that contribute to a sub-portfolio up to a portfolio. So you can have all these different kinds of combinations. Here's one project into sub-program, into program, into your portfolio. Many different ways you can do that. Now here is, again, out of your PMBOK, organizational project management, and it shows your projects, programs, and portfolios. And on the left, down here on the left, it describes how scope, how change, how your planning, how your management, how your success, and how your monitoring of those items differ between the three areas of projects, programs, and portfolios. You really need to read this whole thing, understand the differences, so if you're quizzed, or in the PMP exam, you'll understand the differences, and some of them could be subtle if you're not used to this kind of thing. But let's in particular look at one thing. Let's look down here at the success. What does success, how is it defined with these three things? Well, with a project, success is measured by the product and the project quality, the timeliness of getting the project done, the budget compliance, your cost, and the degree of customer satisfaction. That describes success of a project. And that should be familiar. We mentioned that a little earlier. Now, success of a program, it's measured by the degree to which the program satisfies what? The needs and benefits for which that program was undertaken. And by default, all of the projects underneath that program have to have customer satisfaction and everything else, like it says on the left there. Now, under portfolio, what's portfolio success? It's measured in terms, now we're getting into management speak here. It's measured in terms of the aggregate investment performance and the benefit realization of that portfolio. Senior management up there, they have their business strategies, their goals, and it's difficult for the people down in the trenches to really understand maybe what they're talking about, because they're talking about these fancy financial terms and so on, but their portfolios are designed to achieve certain specific strategies and goals, and so they call those things aggregate investment performance and realization of their benefits of the portfolio. So these are the measures of success, from the very high level management speak down to the trenches of, did we manage our cost and our time right? Is the customer satisfied? Did we give him what he wanted? So success. And I point that out because this is important. I recall myself having a question on the PMP exam about success of these things. Not to say that you may not be asked any of the other categories either, like scope or change, but read this and understand the differences, because some of them tend to be a little subtle perhaps. So here we are, projects and strategic planning. some project managers I talk to, they say, you know, I have a project, I'll just do it. I don't care, you know, why I'm doing it. Well, you do need to know why you're doing it. Well, I mean, you know, it gives you incentive, it gives you motivation, it gives you pride in, you know, in your company that's paying you your salary. You know, if you're a contractor coming in to do this work, you know, you know why you're doing it, and it gives you motivation to do it better. So what do projects do? They accomplish these strategic objectives from the top down. And what are they? Well, some of them are this. You know, you may have a project to create market demand for a product, like the pet rock. Boy, that was both a market demand and a market opportunity. If you remember pet rocks back in the 70s, guys selling these rocks he picked up in a stream for, you know, like $5 each with a little manual on the care and feeding. He made $1 million like in a month because of this. So, you know, strategic objective. Social need. You know, maybe you need a project to, you know, help benefit the homeless people as an outreach of your organization. You could do that. Environmental considerations. Maybe you have a plant that's coal-fired to produce, you know, electricity for your plant, and that's, you know, dirty technology. It costs too much to put in sulfur scrubbers in your chimney, so you want to say, let's go to gas-fired plants. So your environmental consideration, you could have a project for that as a strategic objective to increase your company's image up at the top. That's an organizational image kind of thing. Customer requests, of course. You know, if customers want something enough, you may consider a project to implement their needs. Technological advance. Again, if you're finding a declining market share because, you know, your products are not the quality you want when you put them on the shelves in the market, you may want to go to some kind of automated assembly line, robotics, for example, to increase the quality of your product. And that would be a technological advance. You'd have a project for that, and that could be a strategic objective to put that investment, aggregate investment, net benefit up at the top, to do that. And of course, you may have legal mandates, you know, thou shalt do this, or, you know, you're going to be out of business. So all these are strategic objectives of why we have projects. And in a minute, we're going to talk about how do projects accomplish these objectives. Okay, so now we've talked about strategic objectives, so how do we actually accomplish those? Well, basically, we execute the project management plan. This is your main output from planning, the planning process group. This is the first thing you would create. And of course, it won't be complete by any means once you start it, but this is your main project document, and everything you do, all of the knowledge areas, all of your plans go into the project management plan as your main document. And that is what is executed to produce the deliverables that your client wants. So how do we accomplish it? Very simply, execute the project management plan. Now, actually, it's not that simple. You need to deliver on the stakeholder requirements. What they want is what you need to deliver, because that's why you're doing the project for them. And they're doing it because they need their business unit or whatever they need the project for to contribute to the success of the organization's overall business strategies and goals. You may have in your organization a PMO, which is a project management organization. If you don't, it's not a bad thing, but PMOs can be very beneficial and supportive to a project manager in a number of degrees. They can provide standard project governance so that projects are delivered consistently in a consistent manner by some standards, in some standard templates and documents and policies and all that kind of stuff. So they can give you governance. They can help you as the project manager be successful. You can share tools and techniques. Tools could be your project management system. If all you're using is Microsoft Project, you know that's okay, and they will help you support and train you on that. Or if you're using a much fancier one, like a SharePoint integrated HP project management suite or Clarity or something like that, they'll help you with that too. That's their job, to make you successful. They are the liaisons between programs, projects, and portfolios. You know, they're the ones that would make sure that everything is aligned right, operating right, getting support you need from projects up through senior management to support their goals. And of course, their ultimate, everything else being equal, their ultimate goal is to help you, the project manager, be successful with the tools, techniques, and advice that they can provide. Now, there are three different kinds of structures, and this is in your PMBOK, so you need to know what these are. So if you're quizzed on them, you can answer them appropriately. There's the supportive and consultant. This is a very immature project management office where you have an expert who can go out and help and consult you, set up your project, guide you. You may not have many tools available to you or standard processes or documents, templates, but they will help you and give you the best advice they can so you get your project off the ground. There's controlling and compliance where they say, you know, here's what you use these to your advantage, and they will monitor and check up on you to make sure that you're doing things in the manner that's prescribed by the organization or by the PMO. And at the far end of the scale, you have directive and direct control where they will give you perhaps a project manager on your staff. Say, here's your guy. He will do it for you. You shall not do it any other way. So you have this spectrum from a very loose consultant type of PMO to one that is very directive and controlling. And it all depends on your culture. And culture, when we talk about environmental factors in the organization, culture is a huge benefit and it's a huge detriment too. So it's got to be well managed. But you know, PMOs can run this gamut, and if you have one, you need to take advantage of them. So here's operations management and organizational strategy. Here we are again up at the top, organizational stuff. Operations management now is running the business, different of course than project management. But operations management is a key factor in your project management life because it's ongoing business operations. Operations management supports the business strategic and tactical goals. And by the way, again, I recall this on my PMP exam, and it is not in the PMP lexicon, just like we talked about earlier, but the triple constraint, not in the lexicon. And neither is this, but you need to know this in case they ask. And this is different in a CISSP, a security environment. These don't match up. So in the project management PMBOK world, you need to know this definition. If they say strategic, it's 12 months or more to accomplish an objective. If they say tactical, they're talking 1 month to a year to get that done. And when they're talking operational, that could be whatever period they're talking about, a day, a week, a month. You know, so that's it, strategic, tactical, and operational. You need to know those in case you're asked that. Project management, collaboration with operations management is of course critical. The people in operations management are one of your stakeholders. You know, if they are impacted in any way with the project you are doing, you know, they are a stakeholder to you, and you need to collaborate with them to make sure that there's nothing adverse that's going to happen. Or could you capitalize on something that they're doing that they may not realize this project you're on will provide them. So you want to, you know, collaborate with them, work with them, partner with operations management. Business process management, if they're a good organization, you know, they will have established business processes, and you certainly don't want an upcoming project to complicate, negate, or in any way, you know, cause them grief because your project is now messing up their project operations. I'm sorry, their business operations and their processes. So you need to understand what they are. You know, don't execute your project in your own little world. You know, you need to get outside of it and understand the organization. If you do, you will be hugely more successful with your decisions you make throughout the project. And of course, aligning the project with the goals of operations management is another key factor. So all this stuff you need to keep in mind, not just in your little project management world, but the organization at large will benefit you greatly. And your stakeholders, we're going to register them as a stakeholder, and you need to register all stakeholders, not just operations, but anyone inside, outside the organization that could possibly be impacted by your project. And when we get into stakeholder management shortly, we'll see that, how critical that is. And they are influencers, and you add that to your risk register too, because they may have positive or negative influences on your project, and that's a risk you need to manage. And when we talk about risk, we'll see that too. So business value, we've mentioned that. You know, that could be tangible, the income, the net profit, the gross income, all that stuff, tangible values, you know, of all your assets, your plant, your facilities. And intangible values are, you know, intellectual property, your corporate image. You know, all of these things can be impacted by a project, hopefully positively, but if you don't manage the project right, you know, you're going to provide some negative business value, which you don't want. Strategic objectives are strengthened by having good business value, and by improving your processes, business processes, you will also improve your business value. And even within your own project, there is a function called continuous process improvement, where you continually improve your own project processes in there to deliver better projects now and in the future. So business value is key. That's what a project's all about, contributing to corporate strategy, goals, the value of the business. Now, you as a project manager have a role, project manager. You need to be a strategic partner for all the project objectives. Strategic means, you know, partnering with senior management, your stakeholders, your sponsors, operations management, strategic alignment with them. Understand them, they'll respect you more, you'll get more out of them. Things will be revealed to you that you would never have thought of yourself to the benefit of your project. And as we'll see in our next module, there are a number of ways a project team can be organized and who they report to and all that stuff. And regardless of the type of project management organization you're in, the project manager is always the lead person for the project team. Whether it's 2 people working for you, you have a staff of 50, you are the project lead, or project team lead. Now, a project manager can report to a functional manager, you know, the manager of IT, the manager of finance, you know, whatever. You can report to them to do a project for them, or you could report to a program or a portfolio manager, or to a PBO, which is a project-based organization. So you need to know that definition, project-based organization. That's an organization whose mission it is to provide project management services as a unique service, so a very strong controlling type of PMO. So PM could report to any of these things, and we'll see this in great detail coming up. Now, you need as project manager to link, as we mentioned before a number of times, link between the strategy, the organizational knowledge with the project team, link your team with the organizational strategy. Know why you're doing a project. And if your organization is mature and adept enough and forward-thinking enough, they will get the proposed project manager involved during project selections. Heaven help you if you have 15 projects that many managers, department managers, what they propose projects, and whoever says, yeah, sure, that sounds good, we do it. Well, that's a bad thing. Number one, are you contributing to your strategic objectives? And number two, if you don't have the proper backing and so on, you're not going to be very successful. So you need to wean these things down and just pick the projects, and not you personally, but the senior team needs to look at all the project candidates and vet them properly. Look at their return on investment and how they contribute to the organizational missions, and pick the right ones, cut them down, and then authorize those. So that's the link between the team and the strategy. You need to know why you're doing certain things. Very important. It makes you a better project manager, and you'll have more confidence in what you're doing. You'll see it actually contributing to the organization that's paying you. And finally, we have here the best practice by the PM. Practice the methods that PMBOK provides to the extent you can, and we can tailor them to your organization. Make them fit your organization. And you need to work very closely with the SMEs, your subject matter experts, with your business analysts, quality assurance managers, all sorts of people in operations. You just want to partner with these best practices to be able to provide the best service you can for your client. And lastly, role of the project manager, we have interpersonal skills. Now, if you look at Annex A1 in your PMBOK, you'll see a very, very extensive list of the interpersonal skills you, as project managers, should have or should acquire very soon. A few of the basic ones: you need to be a leader, you need to be able to build your team, you need to motivate your team to do your bidding according to the project management plan, right? You need to influence them, you need to influence others, your stakeholders, to get them on board with you. Of course, you need to communicate, a big deal, you need to communicate. You need to make decisions, and in the project charter, as we'll see, the project charter will show you will document to what degree you can make decisions on your own unilaterally without going and asking somebody to do that. Having that authority is incredibly powerful toward the success of a project, and in your confidence to get it done, and your team too. Political, cultural awareness in your organization. Cultures could be very nasty, could be very good. We'll talk about that later. You need to be able to negotiate properly when there's conflict. Negotiate conflict out. Trust building and coaching your staff, and many, many more. So look in the annex there. And those are things that you can acquire just by working or by taking some classes. Maybe there's training in your organization, outside training, that will help bolster these particular skills that you will need in all to be a really good project manager. So that's it for Module 1, where we talked about project management and its relationship to strategic business value. Coming up, we're going to talk about a little more about the culture now, the actual culture, and project governance in more detail. We're going to talk again about project organizational process assets, the enterprise environmental factors I mentioned. We're going to talk more about stakeholders, of course, governance, the team, and a project life cycle. There's different life cycles of various projects. So we'll talk about that in Module 2. So we'll see you then.